second installment of our Federal Opportunity Zone talks. Invest Atlanta is proud to be a key part of the local Opportunity Zone community. Invest Atlanta is also interested in highlighting an array of resources during the COVID-19 crisis. And this following segment you'll see today is no exception to that rule. You'll be hearing today from Peter Trug. He is a co-founder of the Opportunity Exchange, which is the leading platform for connecting Opportunity Zone projects, owners, investors, and community leaders. And everything that we do in Invest Atlanta is focused on building stronger communities and stronger economies. And so today's chat will be very interesting to hear about how the Opportunity Exchange is an end-to-end economic development platform. It helps community leaders, project sponsors, and investors of all backgrounds develop and execute impactful local projects in the city of Atlanta. So the Opportunity Exchange currently provides its platform and web development services to 14 cities and state organizations nationally, including 6 of the 10 communities recognized as national leaders by the Forbes Opportunity Zone Catalyst Challenge. Now, I have asked Peter, of course, who's doing it best, and he tells me that Atlanta is obviously the clear choice for how the national model for how to execute on federal OZs is being done. So I hope that he doesn't feel any pressure to tell me that. But without further ado, let's get the conversation started. Today's conversation will be moderated by Ed Smith. Dr. Smith is the head of our Invest Atlanta Opportunity Zones, and Peter Trug of Opportunity Exchange. So I'll hand it over to you guys for your chat. Thanks for joining us today.
Thanks, Nathan, for passing that over to us. Good afternoon, Peter. Thank you for joining us on the second installment of our Opportunity Zone webinar. For those of you who are just tuning in or seeking more information about Invest Atlanta's Opportunity Zone initiative, it's important to remind that there are 4 key components: community engagement, serving as an information distributor to the Atlanta community and broader community as it relates to how we can utilize opportunity zones to promote social impacts in our 26 federal opportunity zones. Another component is the identification of eligible project sponsors and working with the project sponsors on mission-aligned economic development outcomes, such as job creation and the development of affordable housing. A third component is cultivating relationships with social impact funds, individuals and institutions that are seeking to finance projects in federal opportunity zones that again lead to these social impact outcomes, and a data and reporting component, generally telling the story on what has happened in Atlanta, what best practices have we learned, and how can we further utilize this tool to promote economic development and social impacts throughout our community. So with that being said, we have Peter Trug here, who manages and is the head of Opportunity Exchange. And the Opportunity Exchange is one of the tools that we have used or we are using in Atlanta to help facilitate the type of social impacts that we're seeking. So Peter, again, thank you for joining us on this webinar. As we continue with this conversation, perhaps can you offer us a little bit on your background and experiences which led you to the development of this innovative tool that communities across the country, including Atlanta, are using to promote social impact in federal opportunity zones?
Yeah, absolutely. Good afternoon, everybody who's on the call this afternoon. It's great to be here. Thank you for having me, Ed. It's looking forward to chatting with you for the next half an hour or so. So just to kick things off, as I mentioned, my name is Peter. I'm co-founder of a company called the Opportunity Exchange, and happy to get things started by just telling you a little bit of background about how we got started and what motivates our work at the Opportunity Exchange. So as a company, we're based in Cleveland, Ohio. Atlanta might be smirking to know that it's actually snowing here today. So we're in the midst of a perpetual winter, it seems. But prior to working at the Opportunity Exchange, my background was working at a local community and economic development organization here in Northeast Ohio. And my first experience working with opportunity zones was assisting some of the municipalities here in the Northeast Ohio region as they went about identifying and ultimately nominating the different communities in the region for Opportunity Zone designation. Immediately following that process, we started asking similar questions to those that Ed just laid out. How do you do community engagement in opportunity zones? How do you start to find projects within your community that might be viable for this type of investment? And what does the process look like to help kind of develop those projects and help get them connected to the right sources of capital? There were all these questions that were out there that, at least in Cleveland, many people were asking. So started to chat with some other places around the country and observed that this was these were questions that many different communities were facing, whether rural places, smaller cities and towns, and large municipalities, kind of across the board. These were some of the kind of key action steps that were going to be required for a community to really take advantage of this incentive. And so being motivated by that and being motivated by trying to assist communities as they kind of embark upon this Opportunity Zone journey, decided to create the Opportunity Exchange as a platform that can really help facilitate that type of activity. So very specifically, what we do is work with communities like Atlanta to help create an economic development platform for Opportunity Zone projects in Atlanta. It's a place where if you have a project, you can submit your project, share it with Ed and his team, go about kind of creating a profile for your project, leverage some of the tools that we have on the platform to help kind of tell a compelling story and create almost like the pitch for what you're working on, and then leverage the platform and our national reach to help get the word out about what you're doing. So we work with Ed and his team really closely, as that's a lot of the work that they do, and everybody on the call today is involved in, to try to help make that work kind of as impactful as possible and as connected to community in Atlanta as we can.
So Peter, thank you for giving us that overview. And for those of you who haven't had a chance to check out our portal, it is found at atlopportunityzones.com. There you will be able to identify the various tools and mechanisms that we have put together to promote these social impacts in Atlanta's Opportunity Zones. So Peter, you have experience working with us here in Atlanta, and given your background, you have worked with other communities around the country. We have a large network of entrepreneurs, small business owners, developers who are tuning in. What is the next step or the first step in utilizing a platform like Opportunity Exchange in order to promote these or attract these outcomes that we're seeking? How does one go about this?
Yeah, happy to share a little bit. I think as is sometimes the case with incentives like this, there's oftentimes confusion about how to get started, in terms of, I've heard about Opportunity Zones, what do I do next? And so in working with Ed and his team, we've tried to make that kind of first couple steps as easy and straightforward as possible. So I think the first thing to do, if you haven't done so already, and you're one of those small business owners or you're one of those developers that might be listening in, is go to that website that Ed mentioned, atlopportunityzones.com, and right front and center, you'll see a button that says, like, I have a project. This is for somebody who has an idea for a development that might occur, maybe a small business owner. Click on that, and you'll be brought to a place to kind of begin to create that profile for what you're working on that I described before. Depending on kind of what type of project you have, you'll be prompted to share some information about it. And those are really the first steps to starting to then both share your work with Ed and his team so that they can kind of be aware of it and help make connections that could be helpful as you kind of continue down the process of building your business or of building your project. And it's really the first steps to starting to create kind of this almost like shareable profile that you can use to tell your own story, and they can get featured in the marketplace that we host on the Opportunity Exchange. Anything you'd like to add?
So Peter, given your space or given your role in the Opportunity Zone space, have you seen any trends or noticed any trends in Opportunity Zone activity? I know we're going to talk about COVID-19, but let's say pre-COVID-19, what was the state of the market in Opportunity Zones from your perspective? You have any insight that you can share with our audience?
Yeah, for sure. I think so, with the caveat that there have been some changes recently as COVID has dramatically changed like all of our work. Leading up to that, I think there were kind of two trends that were emerging, that we were observing, and a lot of our partners were observing as well. First was, there were a few reports released within the past month or so that indicated that the rate of opportunity zone fundraising was continuing to accelerate. As more and more people on the investor side of the equation were getting familiar with how the incentive worked, and as they were becoming more and more aware of kind of how to leverage the incentive to make investments, there were a number of reports, perhaps most notably from Novogradac, that were sharing information that the kind of rate of fundraising was accelerating. So, from indications like that, kind of at a macro level, to measurings of kind of new project submissions on the platform and activity on the platform, we were seeing an uptick in activity around opportunity zones, which was interesting, because for those who are maybe more familiar with the incentive, there was some wondering if that would be the case. There was a big kind of investor milestone at the end of last year, and there were questions if this work would continue to be relevant as some of the benefits to the investor side of the equation were reduced. But from our experience and from some of the information that's available more generally within the industry, it appears that opportunity zones are here to stay for a while, and continue to be relevant as a tool for helping facilitate the types of outcomes that the city of Atlanta is looking for, and that many of you on the call are looking for as well.
So thank you for that. Before we transition over to some of the COVID-19 conversation, I wanted to ask you a little bit about social impact and how you all at Opportunity Exchange think about social impact. I know that there are a number of social impact frameworks as it relates to opportunity zones. How does your organization fit within the social impact conversation, and what can communities like Atlanta learn about opportunity zone activity through tools like the Opportunity Exchange?
That's a great question. And I think it's something that really guides a lot of our work at the Opportunity Exchange, is being helpful partners to communities as they navigate a lot of these questions around impact. So for those who maybe aren't as familiar, one of the core questions or big question marks around the Opportunity Zone incentive overall is, to what extent will this incentive really live up to its potential to deliver transformative, impactful outcomes for the Opportunity Zone communities? And for many who are involved in the space, a very key part of that is having data and reporting and outcomes about the type of impact that investments in Opportunity Zones are having. There hasn't been as much federal mandate as many folks would like to kind of have this sort of transparent reporting at a programmatic level federally. But through a lot of the work that we're doing with cities and states on the platform, we're able to understand, based on our work with Ed and his team, some of that data at a more local level for the city of Atlanta that can be really helpful in understanding kind of what types of projects are emerging in the city's opportunity zones and what type of impact might those projects have. So from a data perspective, we're looking to play that role of kind of helpful partner and helping to aggregate and standardize a lot of the data that exists about how the incentive is being used and what types of projects, what types of investment activity are emerging within the city, and providing that to Ed and his team and the rest of the team at Invest Atlanta. The second question that is part of that is then, okay, so you're tracking all of this data. What impact data are you tracking, and how are you thinking about tracking social impact in opportunity zones, so that we can be more sure that we're getting the types of outcomes that we want to see? And in this case, it's helpful to rely on a lot of the work of really good organizations in the space, like the U.S. Impact Investing Alliance, the Beck Center for Social Impact and Innovation, the Urban Institute. There are a number of organizations who similarly carry a very impact-forward mission, and have taken it upon themselves to develop national frameworks for how to measure and quantify impact in opportunity zones. And a lot of those frameworks are tools that we're building into the Opportunity Exchange platform, so that Ed and his team, or anybody who's on the phone who might have a project in Atlanta, and wants to kind of showcase their project with those impact principles in mind, is able to do so sort of seamlessly. So there's kind of two parts to this impact equation that we're looking to be partners on. One is just provision of data at a baseline that otherwise might be hard to come by. And two, when it comes to how to provide that data, trying our best to align it with some of the sort of broader frameworks around impact that have emerged in the space.
Okay, great. Thank you for providing that update on social impact. So before we had this webinar, you and I had a brief conversation about COVID-19, the state of opportunity zones, investment and projects as it relates to that, what communities around the country are doing to transition to continue to support positive economic activity in light of the current pandemic. I was just wondering if you could speak a little bit on some of the activity that you and your team have had in response to COVID-19 and what you have seen around the country as communities shift to better support our economic development outcomes in light of the current situation.
Yeah, it's a particularly relevant question because by pretty much any metric you look at, opportunity zone communities are likely to be those that will be particularly impacted by COVID. And so thinking about ways to integrate kind of COVID response with a lot of this opportunity zone activity is a really important question that I know, Ed, you're thinking about, and a lot of the teams we work with are thinking about. I think one of the most promising things that we've seen from the work that we do across the country is the way in which some of the teams that we work with, who typically are very, very focused exclusively on opportunity zones, how some of those teams have pivoted their actions to leverage sort of the network and relationship building that they've done within OZ communities and ensure that through those relationships, they are connecting, whether it's business owners, residents in need, or any other stakeholder in an OZ who might be able to benefit from some COVID-related resource that the city has developed, ensuring that those connections get made. I think that's been a really, really critical element of helping to bridge some of the barriers that exist between communities and the resources that are available, is ensuring that that network is in place. And I think that's one of the most positive things that we've seen from our work, is that the teams that we work with in nearly all cases have very flexibly and nimbly shifted the focus of their work to ensure that, you know, through the network they've developed, those connections to resources that are being made available are being made. I think that's probably the biggest thing that we've observed as it relates to kind of the community side of the opportunity zone work and the COVID pandemic.
Are there any examples across the country that you have seen as it relates to response to COVID-19 and opportunity zones that you can speak of as communities that have really taken a very proactive role in utilizing their tools to support their fellow citizens and business cohorts?
Yeah, absolutely. I'll share a couple of examples that we're aware of, with the recognition that it's surely only a small part of the overall equation, and by no means meant to be the best examples. They're just those that we happen to be involved with or aware of through our work. I'll kind of break it down into two parts. One is provision of resources and helping ensure kind of that connectivity fabric is in place. Some organizations that we work with that are doing a particularly noteworthy job of this, I think, are the team in St. Louis at St. Louis Development Corporation has done a really great job of making sure that kind of COVID-related resources are being blasted out to their opportunity zone network. You know, so as the city develops programs or things like that can be helpful to with regard to COVID relief and recovery, ensuring that they're leveraging those channels of distribution that they've built around opportunity zones to get the word out about that. Opportunity Alabama has similarly done a really kind of good job at leveraging the network that they've built around opportunity zones and translating that to COVID recovery. You know, they helped to build the state's website as it relates to COVID response. And I know that a lot of the conversations that they've been having with OZ communities and OZ stakeholders have now shifted in nature to continue to maintain a focus on opportunity zones, but not be limited to that. To also say, maybe at this point in time, you know, your plans have changed. Opportunity zone financing might not be quite as high on your list of things that you care about now as it was a couple of months ago, but we can still help ensure that you get connected to the right types of resources and those resources that can support you, given the change in circumstances that has arisen. So I think that's one of this kind of leveraging your opportunity zone network and ensuring that COVID-related relief and recovery resources are being distributed in a targeted manner through that network is one of the kind of leading examples that we've seen. I think on the other side, kind of a second set of examples is around communities that have been really proactive with provision of financial assistance and financial resources. I know the city of Atlanta has done a lot of this. I saw an announcement, I think it was yesterday, right, Ed, around CRE-ATL.
Correct.
And it's a kind of city-specific program there. So I know Atlanta's doing a lot of great work. I'll maybe also mention the team in Cleveland. So a team here locally who has traditionally had a very strong focus on opportunity zones among a number of other economic development related activities, kind of mobilized really quickly to execute a grant stabilization program with specific preference given towards minority-owned businesses in low-income communities in the city, and ensuring that those applicants received kind of extra points in their application process relative to some of the other applicants that were out there, to ensure that the resources were being delivered in a targeted manner to businesses that might not qualify or might not have applied to other resources that are out there. And so I think just another example of really quick action on part of a county to get resources out there, to think deliberately about how to target those resources and to make them available on a really quick time frame. Some good examples of that too. In that case, we were involved with helping to create the kind of intake, scoring, and review process. And so happy to share a little bit more about kind of some of what's worked well there, if that'd be helpful.
Can you please, the intake, scoring, and review process, I think that's something that our audience would be interested in, particularly those in government, as you're sorting through this. So if you could expand upon that, that would be very helpful.
Sure. I think for those on the call who are maybe in the position of thinking through how to design or administer one of these loan funds, and I'm sure, Ed, anybody on your team can probably talk to these challenges more specifically than me. But one of the big kind of limitations that exists out there is just the demand for these resources is so high. You have many applicants that are coming in. And as as a city, you look to target your limited amount of resources to the places where they can make the biggest difference. This question of how do you receive all these applications, review them, score them, ensure that all the information is legitimate, and then distribute funding can be a quite overwhelming task. In Cleveland, there were over 3,500 applications in 1 week, and the goal was to get money out within a 2-week time period. So it's just an immense amount of kind of administrative overhead in terms of running that, particularly when you take into account this question of trying to do some relative prioritization within applications and ensure that those resources are being delivered where the need is greatest. So I think, it's been really interesting. In this case, in Cleveland, we helped develop a scoring model to make that process kind of more automated and efficient. I know other teams like Baltimore has done some really creative stuff using, I think, like an online spreadsheet technology to help kind of manage their way through the process. But it's been very interesting to be a part of the kind of infrastructure building process, I guess, for kind of how a lot of these programs will ultimately be administered. And then also to be a part of thinking through from an impact side of things, how do you leverage these limited resources that you might have as a city or county to really make a difference for certain businesses in your community that may be less likely to receive other resources or maybe particularly hard hit by COVID, ensuring that there's that really deliberate connection being made there is something that I think increasingly, as maybe cities get to rounds 2-3 of their funding, increasingly, I think these questions will emerge about how to do that. And I guess there's been some, in my opinion, some pretty interesting examples and learnings from some early work here in Cleveland that's been able to illustrate that. I think the CRE-ATL fund is probably another good example of that, targeting specifically to creatives within Atlanta is another good example of kind of targeted, very deliberate resource allocation.
So for those of you that are tuning in that want more information on Invest Atlanta's response to COVID-19. I encourage you to review last week's episode. Nathan Regan, who kicked off today's episode, gave a really good overview on our strategies on utilizing new tools to help support our communities in light of COVID-19. So please visit our Facebook page and visit the episode 1 of the Opportunity Zone Initiative to learn more information. Lastly, as we begin to wrap up, Peter, I just want to ask you, I know the Opportunity Exchange was designed to support work in federal opportunity zones. Has your role shifted and expanded outside of opportunity zones? And if so, how can communities like Atlanta think through expansions of missions with organizations like yours to further promote the outcomes that we're seeking?
Yeah, thanks, Ed. It's a great question, because I think a lot of communities who maybe initiated some degree of opportunity zone related work over the course of the past two plus years are kind of wondered at one point in time, what's the longer term runway for how this work evolves, and kind of how does this end up integrating in the long run into our kind of broader set of economic development activities that as a city, as a state, as a county, we're helping to lead on. I think, similarly, having started as an organization extremely opportunity zone focused, we've also been asking ourselves that question, kind of over time. A lot of these objectives, a lot of these processes, and all these outcomes we're striving for at the Opportunity Exchange, like in partnership with you and your team, Ed, are very related and share a lot in common with the kind of more general economic development goals of the communities that we work in. We want to support impactful community projects. We want to support local small business owners, and we want to streamline the way in which they have access to resources and access to capital, so that more people can take advantage of the different resources that are out there, whether they be opportunity zone specific or otherwise. I think the most clear example of sort of this expansion in all of our roles is this current COVID pandemic, where we're all being forced to push ourselves and kind of expand, no matter what side of the coin you're on, the way in which you do your work, and the way in which you can help connect the resources that you have, whether they be financial, whether they be technical, whether they be otherwise, to businesses and residents in need. I think right now this is a great example of our involvement in Cleveland, our partnering with you, Ed, on talking about how there is an overlap between opportunity zones and COVID is an example of kind of one of the first steps that we're all taking as we kind of expand some of the scope of our work, and can only expect that to continue as we keep going.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Peter. As we wrap up, I would just encourage everyone in our tuning into this to visit atlopportunityzones.com for more information on our portal, for more information on how the Opportunity Exchange can be utilized to promote social impact outcomes in Atlanta's 26 opportunity zones. It's also important to note that for those of you who utilize platforms like this, that Invest Atlanta does not guarantee or could not guarantee that you will receive any type of investment through this type of activity. Invest Atlanta does not advocate on behalf of the service providers, project sponsors, or funds, but these are tools that we can use to promote social impact in our communities. So with that being said, again, visit atlopportunityzones.com. Visit our Facebook Live page. And Peter, if there are any closing remarks, I'll pass it to you. Otherwise, we can say goodbye to our audience and they'll check out our work at on the web portal.
Yeah, encourage everybody to take a look online. Thank you for all the folks who joined. It was a pleasure to be able to share a few ideas with you this afternoon. And thanks, Ed, for having me.
All right. Thank you so much, Peter. Talk soon.
Bye-bye.